Now, from the Pope John Paul II Cultural Center in Washington, D.C., Raymond Arroyo.
Good evening. Great to see you all. Welcome to The World Over Live. We've got a fantastic show for you this week. What's becoming of religious freedom in Egypt, the Middle East, and the rest of the world, particularly in light of the wave of anti-blasphemy laws in countries like Pakistan and Saudi Arabia? Here to make sense of it all is Nina Shea and Paul Marshall of the Hudson Institute. They're authors of a new book called Silenced. And later, we'll talk with Father Robert Sirico, president of the Acton Institute, about the headlines of the week and some standout moments from this week's fall meeting of the U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops. So get your questions in early. Give us a ring, 1-800-221-9460 in the U.S. and internationally, 205-271-2980, or drop us an email, worldover@EWTN.com. Let's get started. Here's the brief. News from the world over this week. At the U.S. Bishops' annual fall meeting in Baltimore, Conference President Archbishop Timothy Dolan confirmed that he met with President Barack Obama at the White House last week. In recent months and for years, the Bishops' Conference and the Obama administration have increasingly been at loggerheads over White House policy decisions on abortion funding, health care mandates, marriage, and most recently, general concerns over religious liberty. According to Archbishop Dolan, the meeting was very candid and extraordinarily friendly. Neither the White House nor the Bishops' Conference offered specific details of the meeting. Archbishop Dolan, however, said he was a bit more at peace about religious liberty than when he entered the meeting, and that he believed the president to be very open to the sensitivities of Catholics regarding religious liberty. And religious liberty was the hot topic at the Bishops' Fall meeting. The newly created 10-member ad hoc committee for religious liberty met on Sunday, and its chair, Bishop William Laurie of Bridgeport, addressed the full General Assembly of Bishops the following day, noting the urgency in light of what he called an ongoing erosion of religious liberty in our country. Laurie said the conference will urge the faithful to defend religious liberty and support dioceses and parishes that do so. The new committee has already retained lawyers and a lobbyist to advance their message. We'll have excerpts from Bishop Laurie and Archbishop Dolan later in the show. And as the U.S. Supreme Court announced that it will consider the constitutionality of the president's health care overhaul, Belmont Abbey College in North Carolina has sued the federal government over one of the law's mandates. The Becket Fund for Religious Liberty filed the lawsuit on behalf of the Benedictine College, challenging the Health and Human Services mandate that they offer free contraceptives in their health care plan. The health care regulation mandates as preventative coverages, including sterilization, contraceptives, and abortifacients. According to lawyers, the college will face a $140,000 fine if it chooses to drop health insurance coverage for its employees and students. And a small victory to backers of California's Proposition 8. The state Supreme Court unanimously ruled on Thursday that proponents of the successful 2008 ballot measure defending marriage do have legal standing to defend the measure in court. A federal Ninth Circuit panel asked the state court to clarify the matter earlier this year. Proposition 8 backers picked up the legal fight after both the former governor, Arnold Schwarzenegger, and then Attorney General Jerry Brown refused to appeal an earlier ruling striking down the law. The case can now move ahead in federal court. Both sides anticipate the marriage case will reach the Supreme Court within a year. Back at the Bishops' Fall meeting, Cardinal Donald Wuerl announced the upcoming establishment of an American ordinariate for Anglican communities wishing to enter into full communion with Rome. The canonical structure of the ordinariate was established by Pope Benedict XVI in 2009 as an outreach to disaffected Anglicans. It will function like a free-floating diocese. The yet-to-be-named U.S. ordinariate will be established on January 1st. This past January, the Holy Father established the personal ordinariate of Our Lady of Walsingham in England and Wales, the first of its kind. Ordinariate parishes are fully Catholic, yet retain some elements of their Anglican heritage and liturgical practice. Anglican communities in Texas and Maryland have already entered into full communion in recent months and are expected to become part of this new ordinariate. And the new Apostolic Nuncio of the United States assumed his post here in Washington this week. Archbishop Carlo Maria Vigano joined the bishops in Baltimore. During his address, Archbishop Vigano offered his own high praise for the American Church and for the United States.
This great nation of the United States, so diverse and so rich in many ways, is a country filled with vitality, with a spirit inherited from its forefathers, generous and hardworking, self-sacrificing. This nation, at its very core, maintains the firm notion of trust in God, of guiding hand of providence, starting with those.
Archbishop Vigano was appointed to his new post a month ago. He's a veteran Vatican diplomat and administrator, and we wish him the best in his new position. And Kansas City St. Joseph Bishop Robert Finn has agreed to give local authorities oversight of any cases of alleged child abuse in the diocese for the next 5 years. This comes in the wake of the diocese's handling of a priest accused of possessing lewd pictures of children. The 5-year agreement with the Clay County Prosecutor's Office allows Bishop Finn to avoid additional charges related to the case. Any allegations of child abuse or suspicious behavior will be shared with prosecutors each month by the bishop. In October, prosecutors in neighboring Jackson County charged the bishop and the diocese with misdemeanor counts for failing to report suspected child abuse. The diocese rejects those charges as false. And Italian outfitter Benetton has pulled part of its new Unhate ad campaign after outrage and the threat of a lawsuit from the Vatican. The campaign depicts various world leaders who don't necessarily see eye to eye kissing. Presidents Barack Obama and Hu Jintao, Obama and Hugo Chavez, Sarkozy and Merkel. You get the point. The last photo in the series depicted Pope Benedict kissing a leading Egyptian imam. The Vatican protested the ad as an unacceptable use of a manipulated image of the Holy Father and said that it was, quote, damaging to not only the dignity of the Pope and the Catholic Church, but also to the feelings of believers. On Wednesday, Benetton began pulling the posters and billboards and apologized that the image hurt the sensibilities of the faithful. However, as of Thursday, the doctored picture could still be seen in some store windows. And of D.I. Zing, America's Cultural Decline from Muffin Tops to Body Shots, my recent collaboration with Laura Ingram, is still available. If you don't already have a copy, don't miss the Zing. We actually tackle some outrages like this horrendous Benetton ad. Of D.I. Zing is available at bookstores everywhere and at the usual online outlets. When we return, we'll talk about religious freedom in jeopardy, not only in the Middle East, but all over the world, with Nina Shea and Paul Marshall of the Hudson Institute, and Father Robert Sirico is straight ahead. Stay tuned. The World Over Live continues in a moment.
Now, once again, Raymond Arroyo.
My next guest is the director of the Center for Religious Freedom at the Hudson Institute here in Washington. For over 20 years, she's kept her eye on religious persecution, intolerance, and related issues all over the world. She's also a member of the U.S. Commission on International Religious Freedom. She, incidentally, is also the co-author of a new book, Silenced: How Apostasy and Blasphemy Codes Are Choking Freedom Worldwide. Please welcome back to the show Nina Shea, and senior fellow at the Hudson Institute and an author in his own right, her co-author, Paul Marshall. Thank you both for being here.
Thank you for having me.
Sorry for that long introduction, but when you've got too many credentials, I've got to get it all in. Let's start with, what are these apostasy and blasphemy laws we see popping up all over the Middle East? Many viewers watching in the West won't know what you're talking about.
Yeah, well, firstly, in the Muslim world, and one of the themes in the book is they're spreading west as well. But in the Muslim world, in countries we know are repressive like Saudi Arabia and Iran or Afghanistan, but beyond that, in Bangladesh, in Indonesia, in Malaysia, you have laws or you have rules which forbid you to say anything critical of Islam. And in most cases, there's no definition of what that is. So in Pakistan, there are hundreds of people in prison accused of having blasphemed. That could be, there's a Christian woman, Asia Bibi, who has been sentenced to death, accused of having said something bad about Islam. Another case is a Muslim man. He tripped and grabbed a calendar. It ripped and had a verse from the Quran on it. He's in prison. Oh. So this disproportionately hits religious minorities. Christians suffer from this, but it also hits Muslims, it hits Ahmadis and many other groups.
Tell me why we should be concerned about these laws, Nina, and what are the implications in the West?
We should be concerned about them because they cut off debate both about Islam and within Islam, so that reformers within Islam, pro-freedom Muslims, or Muslims who oppose certain interpretations, violent interpretations of jihad, for example, are silenced in some cases. And those who want to repeal the blasphemy laws themselves are crushed by accused of blasphemy and murdered, like the governor of Pakistan or the Christian minister of minorities of Pakistan, who were both assassinated this year for that.
It's unbelievable. Yeah, so much of this is going on, and we just sort of lose sight of this. And there's also a fear in the West where no one wants to be perceived, obviously, with focusing unduly on one religion or another. So it's sort of a hands-off, we'll just pretend it's not there.
There's a lot of self-censorship. And that's one of the big threats about Islam in the West, is that there are major institutions, whether it's our media or publishers or the Homeland Security, has issued a memoranda to their employees saying not to use certain words that offend other Muslims. And the words include Salafi, Wahhabi, Jihadi, and even the word liberty.
Liberty?
Yes.
Can't use that, no. Why not?
Because an anonymous group of Muslims advised them that the Homeland Security and the State Department, that liberty, talking about liberty to Muslims is offensive to Muslims. I mean, I don't buy it, but that's what
we work with enough Muslims who are not offended by the notion of liberty. Just to add on that, there is this fear of saying anything negative about Islam, and but what we're talking about affects Muslims too. Probably most of this book is about Muslims who are in prison. Committed pious Muslims who disagree with the ruling power. Shiites in Egypt get arrested. And let me just add, if I may, the foreword to this book is Silence, is written by Abdul Rahman Wahid. He died earlier this year. He was president of the world's largest Muslim country, Indonesia, and he was president of the world's largest Muslim organization, Nahdlatul Ulama. And he is thoroughly opposed to these laws. It stifles our debate.
And how are these laws enforced? What are the enforcement mechanisms? And give us a rundown in Iran, in Saudi Arabia, in Nigeria. What are the enforcement mechanisms?
Yeah, well, there's two main enforcers. One is the state, when there are laws like Pakistan or Saudi Arabia. The government will behead, for example, a Sudanese man who's accused of sorcery, and that's a real case that happened just recently. Or put in prison in Iran a Christian pastor, Pastor Youssef, who you've talked about, who's facing the possible death penalty because they said he used to be a Muslim and he's converted to Christianity. So that's one problem, is the state. And this could be a range of offenses from insult to defamation of religion, or making friends with enemies of God in the case of Iran. There's also societal repression. There are vigilantes and mobs who rise up.
Where they simply take it upon themselves.
Take it upon themselves. And you mentioned Nigeria. There's Boko Haram, and that literally means that Western education is blasphemy. The name of that
Haram,
group.
forbidden.
And that's the end of it.
Yeah.
I mean, if you're seen even studying Western texts, or what does that mean?
They could raid your village and kill everybody. I mean, it's zero tolerance.
Now,
They burned 5 churches
So
last
this
week.
is, it bans, yes, the cartoons of Mohammed. It bans the burning of Quran, and that's what we hear a lot about.
Right.
But it does not end there. That's only the beginning, and that's what's very frightening about this.
Yeah, and we've seen these explosive acts, if you will, in the West. The mayor of Rotterdam assassinated in 2002. The Dutch filmmaker in 2004 with the ice pick through his chest. The 2006, the cartoon controversy, which erupted around the world. Here's the question, and we're getting some emails to this effect. Why is Islam so sensitive about any portrayal of their religion? I mean, just today we see the Pope depicted in this Benetton ad. You don't see people bombing anybody or chasing the CEO of Benetton down the street with with an Uzi. What's causing this reaction, if you will, in Islam? And is there something in the belief or the inherent teaching that allows this violent reaction?
We don't go into the theology of Islam in this book, but we do note, and we have several writers like President Wahid, who voice a minority opinion. And they note that it is a traditional position of Islam that blasphemy is punishable by death. But because the term blasphemy is not defined anywhere in Islam, and it's not in the Quran, the punishment, temporal punishment, then you have a wide open subjective opportunity for abuse. And that's what happens all the time. They can be used for political reasons as well.
Talk to us a moment about this organization of the Islamic Conference. What exactly is this, and why are you so excised about it?
Well, it's an association of 56 countries, most of them, but not all, majority Muslim. And they've organized together. They have their own Bill of Rights, which is an Islamic one, and their stated goal is to defend Muslims and propagate Islam throughout the world. So it's very much a religious organization, and one of its goals has been to try and get the rest of the world to adopt these blasphemy restrictions. So it's pushed through the United Nations, it's pushed in Europe, and the Europeans, the Canadians, even the Australians have tended to fall along in this direction.
Yeah, Europe and Australia, Canada have adopted religious hate speech laws, which function as proxies for Muslim blasphemy laws. They have wider uses as well.
And we've seen that sort of thing in the EU, in England, in Canada, where people are charged on hate crimes.
Yes.
Mark Stein, the columnist,
That's right.
and others.
Brigitte Bardot for criticizing the slaughter of animals,
right.
and others have been
Geert Wilders in the Netherlands. And other.
convicted for talking about child marriage in Islam.
But this is really the end of the freedom of speech. Is that what you're suggesting here?
Yes. And these are happening in the West. This has been pressed on the West for about a little over 20 years. It's happening just as blasphemy laws to protect Christianity have become obsolete. So in addition to repressing speech, and Islam is a complex religion, belief system, touches on many areas of life. And so it's a whole body of ideas that are being banned. And so Islam alone is being given this privileged protection from any type of negative commentary or criticism.
And what is the current administration's position on this? You are on the U.S. Commission on International Religious Freedom. Where is the Obama administration and the State Department on this critical issue of really freedom of speech and freedom of religion for other religions, including Islam?
Well, Raymond, we had the First Amendment, so it's a good protection against the hate speech laws. And hate speech laws are different from hate crimes.
Right.
Hate crimes are traditional crimes like murder with enhanced penalties. This is a new kind of crime of just speech. But there are two dangers. We talked about one, which is self-censorship, but the other one is the United States is now, the Obama administration is now partnering with the OIC, the Organization of Islamic Cooperation, on this very issue of negative stereotyping of Islam. And they're holding a conference jointly in Washington later this year.
Huh. And the end game being what? What's the end goal?
Well, President Obama said in his famous Cairo speech a couple of years ago that he took it as one of his roles to end the stereotyping of Islam. Not other religions, I mean, but end stereotyping of Islam. I mean, I don't want people to stereotype Islam, but I don't think the president, I don't think the US government should be involved in that or stereotyping any other religions. But there seems to be a push that the US government thinks it should control what Americans should say, or at least influence what Americans should say about Islam.
Yeah, I mean, the Secretary of State will say that that she does not want to limit free speech.
Right.
But it's playing into an agenda of a group that does. Their whole charter is committed to
why
that.
partner with, if you don't want to limit free speech, why do you partner with a group whose goal is precisely to do that?
Yeah. How is this tied in? And again, there's some emails, and then I want to take your calls. I know you're there. Hold on for a moment. How is this tied into the Sharia law push we're seeing in certain states here in the United States and certainly throughout Europe, where they want to use Sharia law as a benchmark and a way to judge civil cases?
Well, you know, I think the way that this could come through is through international law in U.S. courts. But and so that's a danger. But I think if it were litigated up to the Supreme Court level, free speech would be protected. But it goes under the name of hate speech.
But
not
you do have
Sharia.
a conflict here because they would use the religious liberties enshrined in the Constitution to almost contravene or at least begin to conflict with the First Amendment, right? Wouldn't
They do. And
Isn't that what at the heart of this in the American context anyway?
They do that in Europe, but we have a very different definition of religious freedom. We've always held that it's an individual choice to choose your religion and to practice it freely.
Sure.
It's not a right of institutions, of particular institutions, to be protected by the state or for the state to intervene and regulate speech on behalf of a particular religion. That's never been the tradition here. We've never had federal blasphemy
And that's what you're
laws.
saying is happening via this organization.
In Europe, yeah.
in Europe, the state's doing it. Sometimes there's no Muslims involved. I mean, it's European governments doing hate speech laws. They're not saying we're implementing Sharia. They're saying, oh, we want social peace. Therefore, there's certain things you can't say. In America, the danger is what Microsoft or Google will do to us.
I want to go to Joe from New York. Go ahead, Joe. What's your question?
Hi, Raymond. Good show.
Thank you.
I'm wondering, I've heard on the news recently about Coptic Catholics being picked on. Could you tell me the difference between a Roman Catholic and a Coptic Catholic, and why are they being picked on?
Yeah, the Coptic Christians, but go ahead, Nina, you can explain the...
Well, I think they're talking about
Catholics.
Coptic Orthodox.
Right.
There are Coptic Catholics, but they are Latin Rite Catholics, and they are Copt just means Egyptian.
Right.
But the majority of Copts, the overwhelming majority, are Christian Orthodox, and they're being persecuted. They're not being protected by the state after Mubarak fell. There's the Salafi Islamist extremists that have come out of the shadows and are burning their churches. And then there's the threat of the Muslim Brotherhood coming to power and ruling through Islam. So it's going to be very difficult for that group.
We have a few emails here, and I'll see if I can open some of them. I'm having difficulty. But there are many more questions we have to explore on this in any event. The Pope has called for reciprocity with some of these Muslim nations. We allow you to build your mosques in Europe. Why can't we have a church in Saudi Arabia? What is the problem? Is it enshrined in law that you simply can't do that, that it's running afoul of the state religion?
In Saudi Arabia, they claim they're a special case. They say that the Islamic prophet Muhammad said there should be no other religion. So they're saying, oh, you can have churches in Egypt, you can have churches in Muslim, just not here. Now, that can be disputed. The little country of Qatar is also on the Saudi Arabian Peninsula. And they now allow churches. This was done by the US Ambassador Joe Gagassian, who said to this point, it says, surely that meant Mecca and Medina. I mean, there wasn't a country of Saudi Arabia, 1300, and he persuaded them. So I think even with the Saudis, that's open to debate. But in other cases, not just building churches, but if a Muslim in the West wants to become, if a Christian in the West wants to become a Muslim, they're free to do so. The law isn't involved. We need to say to Pakistan, Afghanistan, Iran, that we want the same freedom to build churches, also to preach the gospel, to speak. In Egypt, churches are being attacked if they try and have crosses outside. They say you could have a building, but no sign that it's Christian. Wow. So we're saying the rights that Muslims have here, which we are very glad to give them, they have equal rights with us, and they should. We want to see the same thing in your country, and I think we should push that at every opportunity.
This month, a young boy was murdered by his classmates under in Egypt.
And the teacher.
Under the supervision and direction of the teacher, with basic impunity. I mean,
in Egypt, for refusing to
in Egypt, he was a Coptic Orthodox.
Yes.
He had a crucifix around his neck.
Unbelievable. It's really unbelievable. Let's talk about the U.S. Commission on International Religious Freedom, which you've been a part since 1999. We reported a few weeks ago, we had Congressman Frank Wolf here. He said the whole commission was in jeopardy. It may not be renewed, and indeed, a senator had placed it on hold, pulled it out of a bill and put it on hold. That senator is the Catholic senator, Dick Durbin. Apparently now, there's been a change. Tell us what's happened.
Just in the last 24 hours, there's been two changes. One, the commission is given a continuing resolution so that we survive for another month. And then also, there's been a bill presented by Senators Lee and Rubio to renew the mandate of the commission. And that has been hotlined in the Senate today. And that means that it's considered non-controversial. And unless somebody puts a hold on it, a secret hold like before, it will be adopted and hopefully renew the commission.
Okay. Well, it does such important and good work, and as do you both. Thank you for being here.
Thank you.
Silenced: How Apostasy and Blasphemy Codes Are Choking Freedom Worldwide is available at bookstores everywhere and online. If you're interested in finding out more about the Hudson Institute Center for Religious Freedom, or to read Nina and Paul's columns, visit hudson.org. Thank you both for being here.
Thank you very much.
Up next, Father Robert Sirico joins us to comment on the latest headlines and a recap of the week's USCCB meeting in Baltimore. The World Over Live continues in a moment. Stay right there.
Now, once again, Raymond Arroyo.
Welcome back to the World Over Live. The U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops had their annual fall meeting in Baltimore this week. Here to help me unpack a few of the major issues discussed, as well as some other Catholic and news stories of the week, I'm joined by the president of the Acton Institute for the Study of Religion and Liberty in Grand Rapids, Michigan. Please welcome back Father Robert Sirico.
Great to be with you.
Good to see you,
Thank
Father
you.
Robert.
Thank you.
This opening statement by Archbishop Dolan, his inaugural address as president, the first one he's given, was a barnstormer.
Yeah.
A lot of people didn't see it. I want to share with you a little bit of what Archbishop Dolan said. He's the president now of the Bishops' Conference. We're going to break this into parts and discuss it a little bit with your permission.
There's a lot there to talk about.
Let's go. This is Archbishop Dolan, part of his opening address to the Bishops' Conference. Take a look.
The church is our home, our family. Remember in The Power and the Glory, when the young girl asks him why he just doesn't renounce his Catholic faith? The unnamed whiskey priest replies, "Why, that's impossible. There's no way. It's out of my power." Graham Greene narrates, "The child listened intently, and then she said, 'Oh, I see, like a birthmark.'" To use a Catholic word, bingo, she was right. Our church, our faith is like a birthmark. Founded by Jesus Christ, the church had her beginning at Pentecost, but her origin is from the Trinity. Yes, her beginning might be in history, as was the incarnation, but her origin is outside of time. Our urgent task to reclaim, love for Jesus and his church as the passion of our lives, summons us not to ourselves, not into ourselves, but to our Lord. Jesus prefers prophets over programs, saints, not just solutions, conversion of hearts, not calls to action, prayer, not protests, verbum Dei rather than our verbiage.
And that was just the opening, okay?
That's incredible.
What was the takeaway there for you?
Well, first of all, what is so incredible about Archbishop Dolan is his ability to move from humor, from this just right in your living room kind of humor, to very serious theology, which is exactly what he does here. Rooting everything in the incarnation and really catechizing. He's catechizing his brother bishops, reminding them, of course, of what they know, but reminding all of us of what the church's mission is, the identity of the church, which is, I think, and we'll probably have occasion to discuss it, the root of a lot of the problems that we face as a church here.
Well, I love the line, our urgent task is to reclaim love of Jesus and his church and the passion of our lives.
Yes, and you see it in him. You see that passion. And then when he goes down this list at the end, this is a beautiful litany. What Christ wants is prophets, not programs, saints, not solutions, conversion of hearts, not activity.
Right.
He's really rooting, and I love the last one, verbum Dei, which is the word of God, rather than our own verbiage.
Yep.
This is very solid stuff, and if we can appropriate this and ingest this, we've got the program for the future of the church.
But it's an internal revolution that he's calling for here.
Yeah.
And indeed, the church has always called us to.
Yes, and this is part of what Pope Benedict has talked about, that bishops are not called to be managers. They're called to be pastors of the church, to really reappropriate our identity, or what he says, our birthmark.
Yeah, and then he went on and he explored the shadows, the dark shadows around the edges of the church. But again, this central theme of passion, living one's life for God, for something larger than ourselves, and to throw everything at it. Take a look.
Here's number 2. Since we are a spiritual family, we should hardly be surprised that the church has troubles and problems galore. To use the talk show vocabulary, that our supernatural family has some dysfunction. As Dorothy Day remarked, the church is the radiant bride of Christ, but her members at times act more like the scarlet woman of Babylon. It might seem, brother bishops, that the world wants us to forget every single church teaching except for the one truth our culture is exuberantly eager to embrace and trumpet, the sinfulness of her members. That's the one Catholic doctrine to which society bows its head and genuflects with crusading devotion. And we profess it too, everybody. With contrition and deep regret, we acknowledge that the members of the church, starting with us, are sinners indeed. But one big difference: we who believe in Jesus Christ and his one holy Catholic and Apostolic Church interpret the sinfulness of her members not as a reason to dismiss the church or her eternal truths, but to embrace her all the more. The sinfulness of the members of the church reminds us precisely how very much we need the church. The sinfulness of her members is never an excuse, but a plea to place ourselves at his wounded side on Calvary, from which flows the sacramental life of the church.
Wow.
Now, if he began with humor in the last soundbite, here he demonstrates sincerity, humility, honesty, in fact, severe honesty, a ruthless honesty with who we are as a church. And he's also tackling here a thing that I think many Catholics don't understand, certainly in the secular world they don't understand, and that is the dual nature of the church. That even as Jesus was God and man, his church is divine and human. And part of that humanity is its brokenness. Now, you may think initially that by admitting the brokenness of the church, you depreciate or denounce the church. Yeah. But in point of fact, because we can admit with humility, in the way the Archbishop has done here, the brokenness of the church, this is an invitation for people to say that the church is the hospital for sinners. Yeah. You know, this is where we need to be, and we need the church because We all know that we're broken in one way or another, and when we experience God's mercy in the face of that brokenness, then things can happen.
And I like the notion that he says this sinfulness is not a reason to dismiss the church, but a reason to embrace her all the more.
Exactly.
Really, cleverly drawn. But again, with Archbishop Dolan, there is that directness. You feel he's speaking directly to mano a mano, but there's no artifice here.
No.
It's very clear. And that clarity and that passion is something we've needed a long time.
And the authenticity of it and the integrated way in which he can speak it. He really kind of models what he's teaching.
Yep.
He has integrated this stuff.
Yeah, well, and I love it. And, you know, it reminds me, when I was listening to him, sitting there and watching people laugh all around, it reminded me of Mother Angelica, who would often drop these little humor bombs, and as people were laughing, you know, she'd cram a little bit of doctrine down their throats when they didn't see it coming. And it makes the whole experience, you're more receptive when you're laughing, when you're open, when you trust the person you're listening to.
That's right.
And it was fantastic. Here's Archbishop Dolan's wind-up, and what a wind-up it was. This is the end of his talk, his opening address to the bishops.
I look out at over 300 brothers, each of whom has a ring on his finger, because we're spoken for, we're married. Our Episcopal consecration has so configured us to Jesus that he shares with us his bride, the church, to love. And there's nothing we enjoy doing more than helping our people and everybody else get to know him and her better. That's our job description. That's the new evangelization, because love for Jesus and his church must be the passion of our lives.
The passion of our lives.
Yeah.
There it is again.
To speak about passion. I mean, it's so infectious, the way he says it and what he's saying. And the centrality of Jesus Christ. And the intimate link between Jesus Christ and his church and the successors of the apostles. I mean, this is an exciting moment. I am not a student of every inaugural speech that a new president of the Bishops' Conference has given, but I suspect if you went through and studied them, you'd find this to be not only one of the most dynamic, but one of the most soul-piercing inaugural speeches.
This had it all. I was a big fan of Cardinal George's speeches because he is such an appraiser of culture. He understands it so well. And being a theologian, it's rich, and his insights are always, I think, spot on, always were. This had both that understanding as well as a bluntness, a directness, and it just cuts through. He brought in art, he brought in Dorothy Day, he brought in Graham Greene, he brought in his own experience, and he even brought in bingo. I mean, what more could you want from a speech? I'd love to know your reaction. I'm going to put the question up on Facebook, what your reaction is to this, and love to see your reaction, just to give you a chance to chime in as well. Then let's move on to this religious freedom discussion. Archbishop Dolan, I think, has been very attuned to the cause of religious liberty and the threats to it. Being in New York when the same-sex marriage bill passed, I don't think the bishops expected to see that pass in Albany. In fact, I think they had assurances that the vote was going to go the other way. And at the last minute, they find this suddenly on their doorstep. That was the wake-up call, if you will, but there have been many others over a series of years.
Quite a few.
And this is Bishop Laurie, who is head of an ad hoc committee created by Archbishop Dolan. And here's his little summation of the challenge that the bishops face. Take a look.
Among the challenges we see is a pattern in culture and law to treat religion as merely a private matter between an individual and one's God, instead of promoting toleration of differing religious views. Some laws, some court decisions, some administrative regulations treat religion not as a contributor to our nation's morality, but as a divisive and a disruptive force better kept out of public life.
I think that kind of captures at least the bishop's view of this, and even the laity, I think, are waking up to this all over the country.
I think we have to underscore here the soberness of this, that the bishops have felt impelled to create this ad hoc committee on religious liberty. I mean, think about that for a moment. There's this there's been this historic quest on the part of Catholics to be integrated into the United States, to be assimilated. And I think we may have gone too far in our assimilation, that we are almost undetectable. The assimilation has tipped over so that we're invisible. And part of that invisibility is that now we are no longer seen as contributing as Catholics to the United States. And more broadly, religious people are not considered making this contribution. And to do this is historic amnesia, because we forget that we wouldn't have had the powerful emancipation movement or the civil rights movement in the United States. Maybe not even the founding of the United States as we know it today, based on broadly understood religious agreement, moral agreement in society. So this is a dangerous moment, and it's something I think Americans are not well suited to kind of really confronting, and this may help us to do it.
Yeah, well, it's a moment, I think, of a little panic has set in. I mean, when you look at Illinois, and you have the bishops there, they were appealing a decision. Again, it was asking Catholic charities to adopt children out to gay couples as well as straight couples, to adopt
unmarried
children.
couples.
And unmarried couples. And there's a policy the Catholic Church has that they simply don't adopt out to non-married couples. So you have a moral conflict here.
Well, you have that. You have also the whole question about referral for abortion from Catholic institutions, hospitals and health clinics and the like. The thing that links these areas is the dependency on government money. What has happened in this country is that a lot of our charitable institutions, and I've written extensively about this over the years, the danger of our institutions becoming so dependent that it either compromises, and in the case of Belleville, the Catholic charities there, the Catholic Adoption Agency, 40-something years old, has disaffiliated itself from the diocese in order to make these referrals. Now, how is that? They call it now the Christian Family Services or whatever it is, rather than the Catholic. How is this any credit to us if we have become, if we have to surrender our identity and our moral beliefs? And this happened, you may recall, in the 1990s, there was an issue just like this. It had to do with contraceptive referrals for children in the Catholic adoption or foster care system in New York. And Cardinal O'Connor at the time simply said to, I think it was the mayor or whatever the entity was, if you do that, we will pull out of this, which would have left New York in a dire straits. And as a result of that, they maintained their Catholic identity. We're in a very different position now, just not even 20 years later.
Archbishop Dolan, in an interview, or Archbishop Chaput, rather, of Philadelphia, in an interview with the National Catholic Register, said he sees this as sort of a cop-out. He doesn't like this idea of going secular, or, you know, he thinks you should be willing to close down and make the statement. He said, but every bishop's going to make their own decision. But he thinks that's the good one to make.
What complicates this issue is that we've weakened the Catholic body, the faithful, so that we have become acclimated to thinking that the state, that our tax money is doing all of this for us. So we have the tax money taken away from us. It's kind of like our school system, where we pay twice for the education of Catholic children who are in Catholic schools, once for the public schools now. So they're not robust enough now to meet this demand and say, okay, we'll do it ourselves. We'll raise the money. We'll find creative ways of providing homes for kids who come to us and who are referred to us based on our own identity and moral standards.
And Health and Human Services also recently imposed that requirement on anyone accepting a grant. And the Catholic Church, the Bishops' Conference,
human trafficking was the issue.
It's a human trafficking grant they receive every year, the bishops have, to help these victims find a way forward. But what they won't provide is contraceptive or abortive services. And because of that, Health and Human Services is saying, well, then you can't have the grant money.
Yeah, this is the problem of taking the king's wine and dancing to the king's tune. You know, I've said this 1,000 times in a different in different ways under different circumstances, and now we're seeing it come home to roost. I'll make a prediction. If this continues on this trajectory, it won't just be the government money that is removed, but there will be laws instituted actually aggressively persecuting and prosecuting the church for some of our teaching, for some of our actions. We are sanitizing the public square of any religious impulse. We're talking now of going from freedom of religion to freedom of worship, which is, Archbishop Dolan said, keeps it in the sacristy, or was it Archbishop Chaput?
No, it was Dolan. They're trying to push religion back into the sacristy.
To make it a very privatized thing, and this, for the very reasons that Archbishop Dolan said in his inaugural speech, can't be from a Catholic sense, because we believe in the Incarnation. We believe in the importance of the world and of this culture, and we are a history-making and a culture-building religion. So we can't do that. We can do it without government money. It would be very hard. But we need to re-catechize our people, and not all of our people are with us.
Well, Bishop Poprocki in Illinois, he said our Catholic charities, they're closing their office. Their adoption office is closing. He said, our Catholic charities can focus on being more Catholic, more charitable, while less dependent on government funding and less encumbered by intrusive state policies. Is that the path forward?
Bravo. That is exactly the path forward. And I think over time, if you see the different choices that bishops have the right to make, because these are prudential decisions, I think you'll see where they will flourish. It will be when this kind of an approach is taken. He will rally the troops. He will galvanize a sense of pride in our institutions, and those will go forward, and the others will just dissipate and assimilate.
The bishops rightly framed this as a religious liberty assault. This is an assault on religious liberty across the board.
Sure it is.
However,
as though secularism wasn't a religion.
Right? Exactly. But there's a backdrop here, a precursor that perhaps we all missed. Archbishop Dolan didn't. He referenced a little bit of this in his press conference. Listen to this comment about some of these hot-button social issues and where the church is feeling the boot of the government when it comes to grants and the like. Take a look.
We bishops should not forget that we do have a teaching task ahead of us. We got a teaching task ahead of us in a whole boatload of issues, that's for sure, in that we realize that on some issues a good chunk of our people are not with us. That doesn't inspire us to change the teaching. We don't have that right to do it, but it does inspire us to try to present it more attractively and with more cogency.
The question is, how do you get them back with the church?
You do what Archbishop Dolan said in his inaugural speech. You catechize them. You teach them what the Incarnation means. You develop in them a passion for Jesus Christ. I mean, we built Western civilization, and we can do it again. It's going to be harder, but we have to go back to our roots, and maybe we will be smaller. In fact, the Holy Father has said that repeatedly, that maybe what we have to do is be a creative minority. And that's okay, because, boy, we're not going to be a marginal minority. Even if we reduce the size of the church in half, you'd still have a major institution with an incredible amount of potency because of the clarity of her mission in the world.
I want to shift topics, talk about some other things in the news. We reported last week, in the wake of that international financial document issued by the Pontifical Council of Justice and Peace, or Peace and Justice, they called...
Justice and Peace.
Justice and Peace. I had it right. I always invert them. They called for a world tax financial authority, a world body, like a world bank with taxing authority.
A world authority with a capital A. Throughout the document, it had a capital A in it.
And then there was the ricochet effect, where it was reported by Sandro Magister, who's an esteemed Vatican journalist.
One of the best.
That Cardinal Bertone, the Secretary of State, created a new protocol where all documents had to be read and approved by him before they were released to the public or released in any fashion. Sandro Magister understood this to be a reaction to that document and the headlines it garnered, that financial authority document. Now there's a new report contradicting that, suggesting that this is a CNS Rome bureau chief, claiming that it wasn't that, it was another document. What do you think of this?
I think there were two documents the same week, and I think it's hard to say whether Bertone was reacting more to the one or to the other. Certainly it came out after the other. I think that it's the usual policy that those documents are vetted by the Secretary of State. This was a particularly incendiary one because a lot of people in the Catholic world who would normally be in favor of what the Vatican is saying were very concerned on a professional level as to what was going on. I wrote an article in the Wall Street Journal on it, and I tried to take a positive view by praising the analysis but criticizing the solution. I think that when you have Bertone, when you have, in the case of this document, Cardinal Turkson and his secretary, Tozzo, Monsignor Tozzo, and Lombardi, who is the press secretary of the Vatican, all saying before, at the press conference, this is not a teaching document. It is a study paper. It is to provoke questions and dialogue. Well, they succeeded, but it is, I think, if you read both Magistra's analysis and the one from the Catholic News Service, I think they are reporting on the same basic thing, but taking a little bit different spin on it, but I think it's the same core thing. The Vatican is concerned that documents just not proliferate, not without some kind of control over the quality and the consistency.
Yeah, and that's a good thing.
Yeah,
good thing
it's a
that
good
it's
thing.
being watched
Professional.
and that the Secretary of State himself is the final word. The buck stops with him. That's important. I want to move to this Penn State tragedy we're seeing unfolding, this sex abuse story that just gets uglier and uglier. And the only reason I bring it up at all is because the media has attempted to insert, if you will, or connect the Catholic experience and what we saw happen over the last decade or so in the Catholic Church with what's happening at Penn State. Is that a fair comparison?
The obvious elements where there is a comparison to be made, that people knew things that happened and didn't report it to the proper authorities, were not timely in their response to it. But I think the problem with this is that it's not, we still have not gotten our hands around this issue as a whole. We focus now on two moral institutions, the Church and Penn State, because it has this great reputation of being a moral institution. But we don't understand somehow that our schools are rife with this, that there's almost 10% of the young boys who go through school will at one time or another be propositioned or in some way approached by an official.
In a public institution.
And public institutions, the schools are rife with this, and they are passed on.
Well, and this is I think a media difficulty, because the media keeps insisting on this narrative that this is a Catholic problem. And if you look at all the research, before the sex abuse crisis, after it, and during it, it all suggests that this is a cultural phenomenon and really a cultural, societal problem. Carol Shakeshaft, I'll remind people of this, Bill Donahue would always trumpet her research. She is a Hofstra University professor, and in 2004, she had a study prepared for the U.S. Department of Education, and it found, I quote, "The physical sexual abuse of students in schools is likely more than 100 times the abuse by priests." 100 times. That statistic is rarely cited, but I do think the only thing that I think instructive we can pull from this horrible Penn State story is that it puts all of this in some societal context.
It begins to. It begins to. The other part of this thing is the weakness, the cultural moral weakness, is that when we know people, when we hold people in esteem, there is a tendency to try and cover it over or not be as aggressive or to see if we can solve this outside of the public glare. I have dealt with parents who don't want to report it for the sake of their children. They'll get the children therapy.
Not wanting to subject the kid to
They don't want the kids, they don't want the families. Maybe they're related to people, because most child abuse occurs by someone who knows the child is related or something like that. So it becomes, I think, talking about this may in the end, in a very sad way, be a very rich contribution that our experience will make to the culture as a whole, to raise the awareness that it is a good thing to report when a child has been abused or when you suspect, to find some way of exposing this and getting it on the table, because the light of day will help us.
It's a moral obligation, and it falls on all of us in society.
Very important.
And the likelihood of being, reading this research, the likelihood of being abused in the church context today is remote. Whereas
very much
in
so.
these other institutions, in the family, in the school, in the locker room, there's a much greater incidence, and we need to raise our antenna there as well as in the church setting.
Yes, exactly.
So, thank you, Father Robert. We will leave it there.
Always a pleasure being with you.
The pleasure's ours. For more on Father Robert and the work of the Acton Institute, visit acton.org. You can also check out Acton's new initiative on poverty at povertycure.org. Well, that is all the time we have. But remember, the Truth and Life audio Bible is still available through the EWTN Religious Catalog. It's the only Catholic dramatized audio Bible available anywhere. World-class actors Stacy Keach, Michael York, John Rhys Davies, and many more bring the Gospels to life as never before. Go to RaymondArroyo.com. I've got a link at the top to the catalog page there. And as long as you're visiting the site, check out our Facebook and Twitter pages. They're linked through on the left-hand side of the web page. And we're talking still. I see the conversation about Archbishop Dolan, and I'll jump on and respond. Until next week, we will be scouting the world over for all that is seen and unseen. On behalf of the staff and crew of EWTN News, I'm Raymond Arroyo. And be sure to watch our Thanksgiving special next week. Randy Wallace, Hollywood screenwriter, and country legend Colin Ray join us. It's a special world over you won't want to miss. On behalf of the staff and crew of EWTN News, I'm Raymond Arroyo. Thanks for watching. Bye now.